Chapter 1. The breaking point. Calvin Richards stared at the blinking cursor on his laptop screen like it was mocking him. Another dating profile draft. Another attempt to sound interesting without sounding desperate. He sighed and closed the lid with a soft click, leaning back in his chair until it groaned in protest. 32 years old, single, and apparently allergic to whatever passed for modern romance. He wasn't bitter, at least not entirely. He was just tired. Tired of being someone's accessory in a curated Instagram life. Tired of women who treated relationships like side quests while keeping their main game running on dating apps. Tired of being told, in polite and not so polite ways, that he was the problem. He rubbed his face and muttered, "Reliable, loyal, decent guy seeks woman who doesn't need a ring light to feel alive. Yeah, that'll go over great." The truth was, Calvin liked women. Loved them, even. He just hadn't met one he could trust completely. Not trust in the sense of passwords and bank accounts. Trust in the sense of being seen for who he was without being asked to audition for the role of perfect boyfriend. His phone buzzed with a group chat notification. Guys' night? He stared at the message from his friend Marcus and felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Loneliness, maybe, or frustration. Because even when he hung out with his friends, the conversations never went deeper than sports scores and craft beer recommendations. Not that he didn't enjoy those things, but sometimes he wanted more. A space to vent. To figure things out without being labeled fragile or toxic or whatever the trending insult was this week. Scrolling through social media only made it worse. Support groups for women everywhere, career struggles, dating woes, mental health. For men, nothing. Just memes about man up and figure it out. Calvin tossed his phone onto the couch and stared at the ceiling. What if we had our own space? He murmured. The idea hit him like a spark in dry grass. A club. Not the cigar-smoking, velvet chair kind. A real community. Men helping men. Sharing skills, advice, and maybe a little sanity. By the time he fell asleep, the plan had taken root. The next evening, Calvin sat across from Marcus and two other friends at their usual bar. The place smelled like fried wings and spilled beer, and the TV over the counter blared highlights from last night's game. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You look like you've been thinking. Dangerous." Calvin smirked. "What if we started a club?" "A club?" said Derek, the youngest of the group, nursing a soda like it was whiskey. "What kind of club? Please tell me it's not a book club. I barely survived high school English." "Not a book club," Calvin said. "A men's club. For us. For guys who are tired of all this." He gestured vaguely at the world outside. The noise, the judgment, the endless pressure to be everything and nothing at the same time. Marcus leaned back. "You mean like therapy?" "No," Calvin said quickly. "Not therapy. Just a space where we can talk, help each other out, share skills. You know, like leveling up." Derek snorted. "Leveling up? What are we, in a video game?" Calvin grinned. "Kind of. Think about it. You're great with cars. Marcus knows finance. I can handle home repairs. We pool what we know and everyone wins." The fourth man at the table, Sam, spoke up for the first time. "My grandfather's got a barn. Out on his property. Private. Nobody would bother us there." Calvin felt a thrill of excitement. "Perfect." Marcus raised his glass. "So what's the catch?" "Simple rules," Calvin said. "Like Fight Club. We don't talk about the club." Derek laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Calvin said. "We keep it quiet. No drama. No judgment. Just men helping men." Sam nodded slowly. "I like it." And just like that, the barn club was born. Over the next month, the idea spread quietly. A friend told a friend who told a cousin who told a neighbor. By the time Calvin pulled up to the barn for the first official meeting, the gravel driveway was lined with trucks and sedans. He stepped inside and stopped short. The place smelled of hay and oil, and the air buzzed with laughter and conversation. Men of all ages, 20-somethings in hoodies, retirees in flannel, stood in clusters, swapping stories and tips. Calvin felt something loosen in his chest. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. And he had no idea that this barn, this crazy idea, was about to change his life in ways he couldn't imagine. Chapter 2. The gathering. The barn looked like something out of a country postcard. Weathered wood, a tin roof that had seen better decades, and a wide double door that creaked like an old man's knees. Calvin parked his truck at the edge of the gravel drive and stepped out, boots crunching underfoot. The January air bit at his cheeks, but he barely noticed. His pulse was thrumming with anticipation. He had no idea if this would work. No idea if anyone would even show up. The plan had sounded great over beers, but plans always sound great over beers. Reality was another story. He tugged his jacket tighter and walked toward the barn. The door groaned open, and Calvin froze. They came. Not just Marcus and Derek and Sam, but a dozen others. Men he barely knew. Men he'd seen around town. Men he'd never met in his life. Some stood in small clusters, talking and laughing. Others leaned against the walls, sipping coffee from thermoses. The smell of hay mixed with the faint scent of motor oil and something sweet, maybe donuts. Calvin blinked, then grinned. "Well, damn." Marcus spotted him and waved. Look who finally decided to show up. Mr. Visionary himself. Calvin walked over, shaking his head. I thought maybe 3 people would come. 4. Tops. Word travels fast, Marcus said. Especially when you tell guys there's free coffee and no judgment. Derek popped up beside them, his hoodie half-zipped and his grin wide. This is insane. I just taught a guy how to change his own brake pads. He said he's been paying a shop for years. Calvin laughed. That's the idea. We help each other out. Sam joined the group, his hands shoved into his flannel pockets. Granddad's thrilled, by the way. Said this barn hasn't seen this much action since the county fair in '92. Calvin looked around again, taking it all in. The barn wasn't fancy. Just a big open space with a few workbenches and folding chairs, but it felt alive, like possibility had moved in and decided to stay. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. You gonna give a speech or something? Calvin snorted. What is this, a wedding? Come on, Derek said. You started this. Say something. Calvin hesitated, then stepped onto an overturned crate near the center of the room. Conversations quieted, and a few dozen eyes turned his way. He cleared his throat. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming. Honestly, I didn't expect this many people. So wow. A ripple of laughter broke the tension. Calvin smiled. Look, he said. I'm not here to preach. I got tired of feeling like we're all out here on our own. Like we're supposed to have all the answers, and if we don't, we're failures. That's crap. So I thought, what if we had a place where we could figure stuff out together? No judgment. No drama. Just guys helping guys. A few heads nodded. Someone muttered, Amen to that. Calvin went on. We've all got skills. Cars, finances, home repairs, whatever. We share what we know, we learn what we don't. And maybe, just maybe, we make life a little less exhausting. He paused, scanning the room. That's it. No big speeches. No secret handshake. Just show up, help out, and keep it quiet. Like Fight Club, but with fewer broken noses. Laughter rolled through the barn, warm and easy. Calvin felt his shoulders relax. All right, he said, hopping down from the crate. Let's get to it. The next hour was a blur of activity. Someone set up a makeshift coffee station on an old workbench. Another guy hauled in a toolbox big enough to fix a spaceship. Conversations sparked everywhere. About mortgages, carburetors, and the best way to patch drywall without making it look like a crime scene. Calvin drifted from group to group, soaking it in. He helped a guy named Tony figure out why his kitchen sink was leaking. It's always the damn gasket. Then listened as an older man explained compound interest like it was a bedtime story. It wasn't just practical advice, though. It was stories. Real stories. About jobs lost and found. Marriages that worked and didn't. Kids who drove them crazy but made life worth living. For the first time in years, Calvin felt lighter. Like he wasn't carrying the weight alone. Marcus sidled up with a grin. You see this? You started something. Calvin shrugged, but his chest warmed. Guess so. Derek appeared, holding a donut like it was a trophy. Best club ever. Free food, free advice, and nobody's trying to sell me essential oils. Calvin laughed. That's the tagline right there. Sam wandered over, his expression thoughtful. You think this'll last? Calvin looked around at the barn full of men talking, laughing, helping each other. He thought about the world outside, the noise, the judgment, the endless pressure, and then back at this quiet pocket of sanity. Yeah, he said softly. I think it will. By the time the meeting wound down, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. Trucks rumbled down the gravel drive, taillights glowing in the dusk. Calvin lingered, helping Sam stack chairs and sweep up crumbs. The barn felt different now, like it had absorbed the energy of the day and was holding on to it. As he locked up and headed to his truck, Calvin felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He didn't know what the future held. Didn't know if this club would change anything big. But for tonight, it had changed something small. Something that mattered. And that was enough. Chapter 3. The first meeting, the second Wednesday, came faster than Calvin expected. He'd spent the past week replaying the first gathering in his head, half worried it had been a fluke. Maybe the novelty had drawn them in, and now the barn would be empty, echoing with the sound of his own disappointment. He pulled up to the gravel drive just as the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in bruised purples and gold. Trucks and sedans lined the property again. More than last time. Calvin's chest loosened. Inside, the barn buzzed like a hive. Folding tables had been dragged into a rough circle, and men were already swapping tools and stories. Someone had set up a portable heater in the corner, humming like a lazy bee. The smell of coffee mingled with sawdust and something smoky, maybe jerky. Calvin grinned. Round 2, he muttered, stepping inside. Marcus spotted him first, waving a wrench like a conductor's baton. Calvin, you're late. We were about to vote you out. Calvin laughed, shrugging off his jacket. You can't vote me out. I'm the founder. Founder, schmounder, Derek called from across the room, where he was elbow deep in a toolbox. You show up late, you lose privileges. That's democracy. Calvin shook his head, smiling as he made his way to the center. What's on the agenda? Marcus grinned. Agenda? You think we're that organized? This is chaos with coffee. Sam appeared with a clipboard because of course Sam had a clipboard. Actually, he said, I thought we could start with introductions. Last time was great, but half the guys didn't even exchange names. Calvin nodded. Good idea. Sam tapped the clipboard like a teacher calling roll. All right, gentlemen, let's do this quick. Name what you're good at and what you're hoping to learn. The circle formed, boots scuffing against the concrete floor. Calvin listened as the roll began. Tony, said a burly man with grease-stained hands. Mechanic, I can fix anything with an engine. Hoping to learn how not to get robbed on home repairs. Rick, said a guy in a crisp button-down that looked out of place in a barn. Finance, investments, budgeting, all that jazz. Hoping to learn how to change my own oil, so I stop embarrassing myself. Derek, came the next voice, loud and proud. Car guy, also I make a mean chili. Hoping to learn woodworking because my coffee table looks like a crime scene. Laughter rippled through the group. Calvin felt warmth spread through his chest. This was working. When it was his turn, he said simply, Calvin, home repairs, general handyman stuff. Hoping to learn patience. That earned a few chuckles. Calvin grinned. The introductions rolled on, and soon the barn was alive with activity. Rick was explaining compound interest to a guy who thought APR was a new streaming service. Tony had 3 men gathered around a diagram of a carburetor like it was a treasure map. Calvin drifted toward a workbench where an older man, gray hair, weathered hands, was sanding a piece of wood with slow, deliberate strokes. Looks good, Calvin said. The man glanced up, eyes crinkling. Thanks. Name's Walt. Calvin. He nodded at the wood. What are you making? Cutting board, Walt said. Simple but solid. Like most things worth keeping. Calvin smiled. You come last week? Walt shook his head. Heard about it from my grandson. Thought I'd see what all the fuss was about. Well, Calvin said. Glad you did. Walt studied him for a moment, then said, You're the one who started this, huh? Calvin shrugged. Guilty. Walt's smile was slow and knowing. Good idea. Men need a place. Always have. World's loud these days. Hard to hear yourself think. Calvin felt the words settle deep. Yeah, he said softly. That's exactly it. As the evening wore on, the barn turned into a symphony of voices and laughter. Someone cranked up a classic rock playlist on a Bluetooth speaker. Coffee flowed like water. Advice flew faster than gossip at a family reunion. Calvin found himself fixing a loose hinge on a toolbox while Marcus debated the merits of Roth IRAs with Rick. Derek tried to convince 3 skeptical men that chili was a legitimate dinner party dish. It was messy. It was loud. It was perfect. At one point, Sam sidled up, clipboard still in hand. You realize this is turning into something big, right? Calvin glanced around at the crowded barn, at men swapping tips and stories like old friends. Yeah, he said. I think it is. Sam grinned. You ready for that? Calvin hesitated, then smiled. Guess I better be. By the time the meeting wound down, the heater had given up, and the barn was chilly enough to see your breath. Trucks rumbled down the drive, headlights cutting through the dark. Calvin lingered, helping Walt pack up his tools. The older man clapped him on the shoulder. You did good tonight, son. Calvin swallowed the lump in his throat. Thanks. When the last taillight disappeared, Calvin stood in the quiet barn, hands shoved in his pockets. He felt tired, sure, but it was the good kind of tired. The kind that came from building something real. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was standing on solid ground. And he had no idea that the next step, the one that would change everything, was waiting just around the corner. Chapter 4. Enter the unexpected. Calvin hated grocery shopping. Always had. The fluorescent lights, the endless aisles, the way people parked their carts like they owned real estate. It was chaos disguised as convenience. But the barn club needed coffee, and coffee didn't magically appear in a barn. He pushed his cart down the aisle, scanning for the cheapest bulk pack that didn't taste like burnt rubber. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Don't forget sugar. Last week tasted like punishment. Calvin smirked and tossed 2 bags of sugar into the cart. He was halfway to the checkout when it happened. She crashed into him. Not literally, though it was close. Her cart clipped his wheel, and a bag of flour tumbled to the floor like a white grenade. Whoa! Calvin bent down, scooping up the bag before it burst. You okay? She laughed. A quick, bright sound that made him glance up, and then he forgot how to breathe. She wasn't flashy. No designer coat, no phone glued to her hand. Just jeans, a soft green sweater, and hair pulled into a messy bun that somehow looked deliberate. Her eyes were warm, the kind that made you feel like you just walked into sunlight. I'm fine, she said, taking the flour with a sheepish smile. Sorry about that. I was trying to avoid the guy doing donuts with his cart in aisle 3. Calvin chuckled. Grocery store Grand Prix. Happens every time. She grinned, and for a second, Calvin felt something shift, like the air had changed. I'm Calvin, he said before his brain could talk him out of it. Lila, she replied. adjusting her cart. Nice to meet you, Calvin. He nodded, trying not to stare like a rookie. You bake. He gestured at the flour. Sometimes, she said. Mostly I just like carbs. Bread, muffins, cookies. You know, the essentials. Calvin laughed. Sounds like a solid life philosophy. She tilted her head, studying him. You look like a coffee guy. Calvin glanced at his cart, loaded with enough coffee to caffeinate a small army. Guilty. Big army or big addiction? She teased. Both, he said, smiling. I run a group. We meet every week. Coffee's basically our fuel. Her eyebrows lifted. A group? Like a book club? Calvin hesitated. The barn club rule flashed in his head. We don't talk about the club. But this wasn't Fight Club. It was, well, okay, it was kind of Fight Club with power tools. Not a book club, he said carefully. More like a skills exchange. Guys helping guys. Fixing stuff. Sharing advice. Lila's smile widened. That's actually kind of amazing. Calvin blinked. You think so? Sure, she said. Most people just complain about things being broken. You're doing something about it. Her words landed like a warm hand on his shoulder. He wasn't used to that. Someone seeing the good without turning it into a punchline. Before he could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then sighed. I should go. My sister's waiting in the car, and if I make her late for yoga, I'll never hear the end of it. Calvin nodded, trying not to sound disappointed. Right? Well, nice meeting you, Lila. She smiled, and for a second he thought she might say something else. But then she pushed her cart toward the checkout, leaving Calvin standing there with a bag of sugar and a heart doing cartwheels. On the drive home, Calvin replayed the encounter like a highlight reel. Her laugh, her smile, the way she didn't treat him like a project or a punchline. He shook his head, grinning at the windshield. Get a grip, Richards. You talked for 5 minutes in a grocery store. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just 5 minutes. It was a spark. And he hadn't felt one of those in a long, long time. That night at the barn, Calvin tried to focus on the meeting. Tried to listen as Walt explained the finer points of sanding wood grain and Marcus debated the ethics of credit card points. But his mind kept drifting back to Lila. Derek noticed. Of course he did. Derek noticed everything. You're smiling like a guy who just found a 20 in his jeans, Derek said, nudging Calvin with his elbow. What's up? Nothing, Calvin said too quickly. Derek grinned. Oh, it's something. Spill. Calvin sighed. Met someone. At the store. Marcus perked up. Details. Calvin shook his head. No details. It was just a conversation. Derek smirked. Aha. And now you're grinning like a Hallmark movie extra. Calvin rolled his eyes, but he couldn't stop the smile tugging at his mouth. Sam wandered over, clipboard in hand. What's this about Hallmark? Calvin met a woman, Derek announced like he was breaking news. Sam raised an eyebrow. And nothing, Calvin said firmly. It was 5 minutes. She's probably forgotten my name already. Marcus chuckled. You gonna see her again? Calvin hesitated. I don't know. But as he drove home later, the question lingered. Would he? And if he did, what then? Chapter 5. The club grows by the third Wednesday. The barn looked less like a meeting spot and more like a movement. Trucks lined the gravel drive in neat rows, headlights cutting through the dusk like a convoy. Inside, the space buzzed with energy. Tools clinking, laughter echoing, voices overlapping in a symphony of shared purpose. Calvin stood near the entrance, taking it all in. The folding tables had multiplied. Someone had brought in a whiteboard and scrawled tonight's topics in bold letters. Budgeting basics, DIY plumbing, and, because Derek insisted, chili cook-off rules. He grinned. This was bigger than he imagined. And heavier. Because now, it wasn't just an idea, it was a responsibility. Marcus appeared at his side, holding a mug of coffee like it was a trophy. You realize you're basically the mayor of Barntown now, right? Calvin snorted. Mayor? Please, I'm just trying to keep the lights on. Lights, coffee, chairs. Marcus ticked items off on his fingers. You're running logistics like a pro. Next thing you know, we'll have bylaws. Calvin groaned. Don't even joke. But Marcus wasn't wrong. The club was growing fast. Last week, they had 15 guys. Tonight, there were at least 30. And not just the same faces, new ones too. A guy in a suit who looked like he'd taken a wrong turn on his way to a board meeting. A teenager with paint-stained hands. An older man with a cane and eyes sharp as nails. Calvin moved through the crowd, greeting newcomers, answering questions, making sure the coffee didn't run out. He felt like a wedding planner without the tux. And through it all, one thought kept sneaking in like an uninvited guest. Lila. He'd replayed that grocery store encounter more times than he cared to admit. Her laugh, her smile, the way she didn't treat him like a project or a punchline. He wondered what she was doing now. Baking muffins? Dodging yoga lectures from her sister? Earth to Calvin. Derek's voice snapped him back. The younger man was grinning like a cat with a secret. You were zoning out, thinking about your mystery woman. Calvin rolled his eyes. You're relentless. Hey, I'm invested, Derek said. This is the most romantic thing to happen in our group since Marcus bought that fancy coffee grinder. Marcus, overhearing, raised his mug. Don't knock the grinder. It's a game changer. Calvin shook his head, laughing. It was 5 minutes in a grocery store. She probably doesn't even remember me. Derek smirked. Then make her remember. Go back. Accidentally bump carts again. Classic rom-com move. Calvin chuckled, but the idea lodged in his brain like a stubborn nail. The meeting kicked off with Sam, clipboard in hand, naturally calling for order. All right, gentlemen. Tonight's first topic, budgeting basics. Rick, you're up. Rick, the finance guy in the crisp button-down, launched into a talk about emergency funds and compound interest. Calvin tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting. He imagined Lila walking down the baking aisle, tossing flour into her cart, smiling that easy smile. He wondered if she liked coffee strong or mild, if she preferred muffins over cookies, if she'd laugh at Derek's chili obsession. Calvin. He blinked. Rick was looking at him expectantly. So was half the room. Yeah. Rick grinned. You ever set up an emergency fund? Calvin cleared his throat. Working on it. Laughter rippled through the group. Calvin smiled sheepishly and made a mental note to pay attention before someone asked him to explain amortization. Later, during the chili taste test, because Derek had somehow turned it into a competition, Calvin found himself standing next to Walt, the older man with the cutting board wisdom. Big crowd tonight, Walt said, spooning chili into a paper bowl. Yeah, Calvin replied. Feels like it's growing faster than I can keep up. Walt chuckled. That's a good problem to have. He tasted the chili, winced, and muttered, too much cumin. Calvin laughed. You ever think about how weird this is? A bunch of guys in a barn, talking about plumbing and chili? Not weird, Walt said. Necessary. Men need a place. Always have. Calvin nodded, letting the words sink in. Necessary. Yeah, that's what this was. But as he drove home later, the barn fading in his rearview mirror, another thought pushed through the noise. Necessary didn't mean complete, because even with all the laughter and camaraderie, there was still a space in his life that felt empty. A space shaped suspiciously like a woman with a messy bun and a smile that could stop traffic. And Calvin had no idea that space was about to get a lot smaller. Chapter 6. Chance Encounters. Saturday mornings were sacred for Calvin. No alarms, no meetings, no obligations, just coffee and quiet. But this Saturday, quiet was replaced by the rhythmic thud of sneakers on pavement as he jogged through the park. He wasn't a runner by nature. He was a fix the leaky faucet, mow the lawn, call it a day kind of guy. But Marcus had been on his case about cardio, and Calvin figured a few laps wouldn't kill him. Halfway through his second lap, he slowed near the pond, catching his breath. That's when he saw her. Lila. She was sitting on a bench under a sprawling oak, a paperback in her hands and a thermos at her side. Her hair was down today, tumbling over her shoulders in loose waves. She looked peaceful, like the world wasn't spinning at 100 miles an hour. Calvin's pulse kicked up, not from the run. He debated walking over, debated turning around and pretending he hadn't seen her. But before he could decide, she looked up. Their eyes met, and she smiled. Well, that settled it. Calvin jogged over, trying to look casual and failing miserably. Hey, he said, slightly breathless. Fancy seeing you here. Lila closed her book, her smile widening. Calvin, right? From the grocery store. He grinned. That's me. And you're, Lila? Lover of carbs. She laughed, a sound that made the January chill feel like spring. Guilty as charged. So you run. Calvin glanced at his sweat-soaked shirt and grimaced. Run is a strong word. More like, jog until I question my life choices. Lila chuckled. Sounds about right. She patted the bench. Take a break. You look like you're negotiating with your lungs. Calvin sat, grateful for the excuse. What about you? Reading in the park, very picturesque. She held up the book. Old habit. I like quiet places. And this one's free. Calvin nodded, stealing a glance at the cover. Classic literature? Not quite, she said. It's a mystery. I like puzzles. Me too, Calvin said. Except mine usually involve plumbing. That earned another laugh. Still counts. They fell into easy conversation about books, coffee, and why people jog for fun. Lila was firmly in the why suffer voluntarily camp. Calvin found himself relaxing, the way he hadn't with a woman in years. No performance, no checklist, just talking. At one point, Lila tilted her head. So, this group you mentioned at the store still going strong. Calvin hesitated. The barn club rule loomed in his mind like a neon sign. We don't talk about the club. But she wasn't asking for details, just curious. Yeah, he said. It's growing. Guys helping each other out. It's good. Lila smiled softly. Sounds like something the world could use more of. Calvin felt that warmth again, the kind that made him want to tell her everything. But he held back. Not yet. They talked until the sun climbed higher and joggers thinned out. Finally, Lila glanced at her watch and sighed. I should go. My sister's expecting me for brunch, and she gets dramatic when I'm late. Calvin stood, reluctant to let the moment end. Right. Well, it was great seeing you again. Same, she said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Then, with a smile that made his heart trip, she added, maybe we'll bump into each other again. Calvin grinned. I'd like that. As she walked away, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just hope, but anticipation. And for the first time, he wondered if fate was finally on his side. Chapter 7. The invitation. Calvin stared at his phone like it was a ticking bomb. The Barn Club's next meeting was shaping up to be the biggest yet. Marcus had lined up a demo on DIY electrical fixes. Derek was threatening to unveil his legendary chili recipe, again, and Walt promised to bring homemade jerky. It was going to be good. And Calvin wanted Lila there. He didn't know why the idea had hit him so hard. Maybe it was the way she'd smiled at the park like she actually saw him. Not a project, not a placeholder, just him. Maybe it was the way talking to her felt easy, like breathing after holding your breath for too long. But there was a problem. Rule number 1. We don't talk about the club. Calvin rubbed his face. Why did I make that rule? He muttered. Because secrecy kept things simple. No drama, no outside opinions, no social media circus. Just men helping men. That was the point. But now he was imagining Lila in the barn, laughing at Derek's chilly obsession, listening to Walt's stories, sipping coffee while the heater hummed in the corner. And the thought wouldn't let go. He spent the next hour drafting and deleting texts. Hey, want to come to a thing? Delete. Too vague. There's a group I'm part of. We meet in a barn. Totally normal, I swear. Delete. Sounds like a cult. Do you like coffee? Delete. What is this, a caffeine date? Finally, he tossed the phone onto the couch and groaned. This is ridiculous. Marcus chose that exact moment to call. Yo, Calvin answered, still scowling at the ceiling. You sound like a man in crisis, Marcus said cheerfully. What's up? Calvin hesitated. Hypothetically, if you wanted to invite someone to the club, how would you do it? Marcus laughed so hard Calvin had to hold the phone away from his ear. Oh my God, it's her. Isn't it? Grocery store girl. Park girl. Mystery woman. Calvin sighed. Her name's Lila. Lila, Marcus repeated, like he was savoring it. Nice. So what's the problem? The rule, Calvin said. We don't talk about the club. Marcus snorted. Cal, it's not Fight Club. We're not punching each other in the face. It's a bunch of guys fixing leaky faucets and arguing about chili. Invite her. Calvin frowned. You think the others will be okay with it? Dude, Marcus said. Half these guys bring their kids sometimes. It's not a secret society. Just tell her what it is. No drama. Calvin exhaled slowly. All right, I'll think about it. Think fast, Marcus said. Wednesday's coming. By Tuesday night, Calvin had worked himself into a full-blown mental debate. On one hand, inviting Lila meant breaking the rule. On the other, maybe the rule was dumb. He pictured her smile again. The way she'd said, sounds like something the world could use more of. He was doing this. Wednesday morning, Calvin finally sent the text. Hey Lila, random question. Are you free tonight? There's a group I'm part of. We meet in a barn, yes, a real barn. It's kind of a skills exchange thing, coffee, good people, no weirdness. Thought you might like it. He stared at the screen, thumb hovering over send. Then he hit it before he could chicken out. Seconds stretched into minutes. Minutes into an eternity. Then his phone buzzed. That sounds intriguing. A barn? Huh? You're sure it's not a cult? Calvin laughed out loud, relief flooding his chest. Promise. Zero chanting, zero robes. Just coffee and conversation. Her reply came quick. Then I'm in. Send me the address. Calvin grinned so hard his cheeks hurt. That evening, the barn was buzzing when Calvin arrived. He set up extra chairs, checked the coffee station twice, and tried not to look like a man on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Marcus noticed immediately. You invited her, didn't you? Calvin shot him a look. Don't make it weird. Derek popped up behind them, grinning like a fox. Oh, it's already weird. I'm making chili in your honor. Calvin groaned. Why do I talk to you people? Before Derek could answer, headlights swept across the gravel. Car pulled up. Calvin's pulse kicked into overdrive. Lila stepped out, bundled in a navy coat, her cheeks pink from the cold. She looked around, then spotted Calvin and smiled. And just like that, the barn felt warmer. Hey, Calvin said, walking over. Glad you made it. Wouldn't miss it, Lila said, her eyes sparkling. So, this is the famous barn? Calvin chuckled. Yep, rustic charm included. He led her inside, introducing her to Marcus, Derek, and Sam. The guys were on their best behavior, mostly. Derek tried to pitch his chili as life-changing. Marcus offered coffee like a sommelier, and Sam handed her a clipboard because Sam couldn't help himself. Lila laughed through it all, easy and unflustered. Calvin watched her settle in, chatting with Walt about woodworking like she'd been coming here for years. And for the first time, Calvin wondered if maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just about fixing things. Maybe it was about finding something worth keeping. Chapter 8. Sparks and Secrets. Calvin had never been more aware of a single person in a room. The barn was buzzing, Marcus explaining credit hacks to a guy who thought APR was a new streaming service. Derek loudly defending his chili against accusations of too much cumin. Walt demonstrating how to sharpen a chisel like it was an art form. And then there was Lila. She stood near the workbench, laughing at something Sam said about the clipboard being his emotional support animal. Her laugh wasn't loud, but it carried warm, easy, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Calvin tried to focus on tightening a loose hinge on a toolbox, but his hands weren't cooperating. He wasn't used to this, being distracted. He was the guy who fixed things, kept things running. But tonight, every time Lila smiled, his brain short-circuited. Marcus noticed, of course. Marcus always noticed. "You're staring," Marcus murmured, sidling up with a grin. Calvin scowled. "I'm not." "You are," Marcus said. "It's adorable. Like a rom-com where the guy doesn't know he's the guy." Calvin groaned. "Please stop talking." Marcus smirked. "Fine. But if you don't make a move soon, Derek's gonna start writing fanfiction." Calvin shot him a look. "He wouldn't." Marcus grinned. "He would." Later, when the crowd thinned and conversations shifted to casual chatter, Lila wandered over. Calvin felt his pulse kick like a stubborn engine. "Hey," she said, smiling. "This is amazing. I didn't know stuff like this existed." Calvin shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Just a bunch of guys trying to keep life from falling apart." She laughed softly. "Well, you're doing more than that. You're building something." Her words landed like a warm weight in his chest. He wanted to tell her everything. How the club started, why it mattered, how it saved him from feeling like he was drowning in a world that didn't care if men sank or swam. But the rule loomed in his mind: we don't talk about the club. He cleared his throat. "It's important to me." Lila tilted her head, studying him. "You seem like someone who takes responsibility seriously." Calvin chuckled. "Sometimes too seriously." She smiled. "That's not a bad thing." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not awkward, but charged. Calvin felt the pull, the spark, the thing he'd been missing for years. And then Derek ruined it. "Calvin," Derek bellowed from across the barn. "Tell her my chili's better than Marcus's." Calvin closed his eyes. "Why do I talk to you people?" Lila laughed, and the tension broke, but not completely. By the time the meeting wound down, Calvin was torn between exhilaration and panic. Exhilaration because Lila fit here, like she belonged. Panic because he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep the club's deeper purpose under wraps. It wasn't just a hobby. It was a lifeline. For him. For all of them. And if he let her in, really in, what then? Would she understand? Or would she see it as some weird, fragile man thing and run? Calvin locked up the barn that night with a knot in his chest. He wanted her in his life. He just didn't know if he could trust the world to let that happen without turning it into a joke. On the drive home, his phone buzzed. A text from Lila. "Thanks for inviting me tonight. It was refreshing. People actually talking instead of scrolling. I liked it." Calvin stared at the screen, a slow smile spreading across his face. Maybe, just maybe, this could work. Chapter 9. The turning point. Calvin's phone rang at 6:42 a.m. on Thursday, and nothing good ever came from calls that early. He groaned, fumbling for the screen. "Marcus, tell me this is about free coffee," Calvin muttered, answering. "Wish it was," Marcus said, his voice tight. "We've got a problem." Calvin sat up. "What kind of problem?" "The barn," Marcus said. "Sam just called me. The heater blew out last night. Pipes froze. There's water everywhere." Calvin swore under his breath. "You're kidding. Do I sound like I'm kidding?" Marcus snapped. "Sam's out there now trying to shut off the main valve, but it's a mess." Calvin was already pulling on jeans. "I'm on my way." The barn looked like a crime scene when Calvin arrived. Water pooled across the concrete floor, glinting in the pale morning light. The portable heater sat in the corner like a dead soldier, and the air was so cold Calvin could see his breath. Sam stood near the valve, soaked to the knees, muttering curses that would make a sailor blush. "Tell me you got it shut off," Calvin said, stepping inside. "Mostly," Sam grunted. "But the damage is done. Pipes are cracked. We're gonna need a full repair before next week." Calvin ran a hand through his hair. The barn wasn't just a building. It was the heartbeat of the club. Without it, everything stalled. Marcus appeared behind him, coffee in hand like it was a lifeline. "So what's the plan, Mayor?" Calvin stared at the mess, his mind racing. "We fix it. Fast." "Fast costs money," Marcus said. "And time." Calvin exhaled slowly. "Then we do what we do best, figure it out together." By noon, the barn was a hive of activity. Half the club showed up with tools, buckets, and enough duct tape to patch a submarine. Walt supervised like a general, barking orders with the authority of a man who'd seen worse. Calvin worked shoulder to shoulder with the guys, hauling debris, checking pipes, trying to ignore the knot in his chest. This wasn't just about plumbing. It was about keeping the thing they'd built alive. And then his phone buzzed. "Lila. Hey, you okay? You seemed stressed last night." "Just checking in." Calvin stared at the screen, torn. He wanted to tell her everything. Wanted to say, The barn flooded, the heater died, and I'm knee-deep in chaos. But that meant pulling her deeper into the club's world. A world he still wasn't sure she'd understand. He typed back, "Long day. Fixing a mess. Rain check on coffee?" Her reply came quick. "Need an extra pair of hands? I'm good with buckets." Calvin blinked, then laughed because of course she'd offer. He hesitated for half a second, then typed, "If you're serious, bring boots. It's bad." An hour later, Lila walked into the barn like she'd been born for it. Hair tucked under a knit cap, boots laced, sleeves rolled. "Wow," she said, surveying the chaos. "When you said bad, you weren't kidding." Calvin grinned despite himself. "Welcome to the glamorous life of barn maintenance." She laughed, grabbing a bucket without hesitation. "Point me to the puddles." And just like that, she was in the thick of it, hauling water, cracking jokes, listening to Walt's stories about the winter of '78, like they were gospel. Calvin watched her work, something warm blooming in his chest. She didn't flinch at the mess, didn't complain. She just showed up. And for a man who'd spent years feeling like he was always auditioning for approval, that meant everything. By sunset, the worst was under control. The barn was still a wreck, but the pipes were patched, the floor was drying, and the heater, thanks to Tony's mechanical wizardry, was humming again. Calvin leaned against the wall, exhausted but relieved. Lila walked over, wiping her hands on a rag. "Not bad," she said, smiling. "You guys make a good team." Calvin chuckled. "We try." She studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "You care about this place." Calvin swallowed. "Yeah, more than I thought I would." "Why?" she asked gently. He hesitated, the truth pressing at his ribs. Because it wasn't just a barn. It was a lifeline. A place where men could breathe without being told they were broken. But saying that felt like peeling back armor he'd worn for years. So he said the only thing he could. "Because it matters." Lila nodded like she understood more than he said. "Well, for what it's worth, I think it's pretty great." Calvin felt something shift, like the ground under his feet was steadier than it had been in years. And for the first time, he wondered if maybe trust wasn't as impossible as he thought. Chapter 10. The reveal. Calvin had never been good at vulnerability. He could fix a broken pipe, patch a wall, even rebuild a carburetor, but opening up? That was a different kind of repair. One he'd avoided for years. But tonight, sitting across from Lila at a quiet corner table in a little diner off Main Street, he knew he couldn't keep dodging it. She stirred her coffee slowly, her eyes warm and curious. "You've been distracted," she said gently. "Even before the barn flood. Something's on your mind." Calvin managed a smile. "You notice everything, don't you?" "Not everything," she said. "Just the things that matter." Her words hit like a soft hammer. Gentle, but impossible to ignore. Calvin took a breath, staring at the steam curling from his mug. "There's something I haven't told you. About the club." Lila tilted her head, waiting. No judgment, no pressure, just space. "It's not just a hobby," Calvin said slowly. "It's more than that. When I started it, I wasn't just trying to fix leaky faucets or teach guys how to budget. I was trying to fix something bigger." He paused, searching for words that didn't sound like excuses. "I was tired, Lila. Tired of feeling like men don't have anywhere to go. Everywhere you look, there are support groups for women, and that's great. But for guys? Nothing. Just man up and figure it out. And if you can't, you're broken." Lila's expression softened, but she didn't interrupt. "So I thought, what if we had a place? A space where men could talk, share skills, help each other without being judged. That's what the barn is. It's not about shutting anyone out. It's about survival." He looked up, his chest tight. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think it was some anti-woman thing. It's not. I love women. I just haven't met one I could trust with this. Until now." Silence stretched between them, not heavy, but full. Lila's eyes held his, steady and calm. "Finally," she said softly, "Calvin, thank you for telling me." He blinked. "You're not weirded out." She smiled. A slow, genuine smile that made his heart trip. "Weirded out? No. Honestly, I think it's incredible." Calvin stared. "You do." "Of course," she said. "You saw a gap and filled it. You built something that matters. That takes guts." Relief crashed over him like a wave. He hadn't realized how much he'd been bracing for judgment until it didn't come. Lila reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "You don't have to carry all of it alone, you know?" Calvin swallowed hard. "I've been doing that for a long time. Maybe it's time to stop," she said gently. And just like that, something shifted. The armor he'd worn for years, the one built from disappointment and distrust, cracked. Not all at once, but enough to let the light in. They talked for hours about the club, about life, about the things people never say out loud. Calvin told her about the guys, the skills they shared, the laughter that made the barn feel like home. Lila listened, asked questions, and never once made him feel small. When they finally stepped out into the cold night, Calvin felt lighter than he had in years. And for the first time, he wasn't just hoping for something real. He was standing in it. Chapter 11. The big gesture. Calvin wasn't a grand gesture guy. He wasn't the type to rent a billboard or hire a flash mob. He believed in fixing things quietly. Pipes, hinges, broken fences. But for Lila, quiet didn't feel big enough. He wanted her to know she mattered. Not just to him, but to the life he was building. The idea hit him late one night, staring at the barn's rafters while Walt lectured Derek about the dangers of too much chili powder. It wasn't about flowers or fancy dinners. It was about trust, about letting her see all of it, the club, the men, the mission, and making her part of it. So Calvin decided he'd invite her to the next meeting, not as a guest, as someone who belonged. But he wasn't doing it halfway. He was going to make it special. The following week, Calvin showed up early with Marcus and Sam. The barn was cold, but his nerves were hotter than a welding torch. "Explain this again," Marcus said, hauling folding chairs like a man questioning his life choices. Calvin grinned. "We're turning the barn into a dinner spot. Lights, tables, real food. No chili wars." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're basically throwing a barn banquet." "Exactly," Calvin said. "I want her to see what this place really is. Not just tools and coffee. Community." Sam, clipboard in hand, nodded approvingly. "I'll make a seating chart." Calvin groaned. "It's not a wedding, Sam." Sam smirked. "Every event needs structure." By 6 o'clock, the barn looked different. String lights hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the rough wood. Folding tables were draped with checkered cloths. Walt had brought his famous jerky. Marcus handled the coffee station like a barista, and Derek, after swearing on his life, agreed to keep chili off the menu. Calvin stood back, surveying the scene. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't perfect, but it felt right. And then headlights swept across the gravel. Calvin's pulse kicked into overdrive. Lila stepped out of her car, bundled in a soft gray coat, her cheeks pink from the cold. She paused at the doorway, eyes widening at the glow inside. "Wow," she said, smiling. "This is not what I expected." Calvin grinned, walking over. "Good surprise or bad surprise?" "Definitely good," she said, stepping inside. "You guys went all out." Calvin shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Just wanted to show you what this place is about." She looked around, taking in the lights, the laughter, the men swapping stories like old friends. "It's amazing, Calvin." And just like that, the knot in his chest loosened. Dinner was loud and messy and perfect. Walt told stories about the winter of '78, like it was a survival epic. Marcus gave a mini finance pep talk that somehow ended with everyone pledging to stop impulse buying power tools. Derek cracked jokes so bad they circled back to funny. And Lila? She fit effortlessly. She laughed, asked questions, even helped Tony explain carburetors to a guy who thought they were a type of pasta. Calvin watched her, something warm blooming in his chest. This wasn't just about inviting her in. It was about showing her the truth. This was his world, and he wanted her in it. Later, when the crowd thinned and the string lights glowed soft against the dark, Calvin walked Lila to her car. "Thank you," she said, her voice gentle, "for tonight, for letting me see this." Calvin swallowed hard. "It's important to me, and so are you." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the cold night felt like spring. "I'm glad you let me in," she said. Calvin smiled, a slow, certain smile that felt like the start of something real. "Me too." And as she drove away, Calvin stood in the quiet barnyard, the glow of string lights behind him, and thought, sometimes, fixing things isn't about pipes or hinges. Sometimes it's about opening a door and letting someone walk through. Chapter 12. Happily imperfect, Calvin had always believed that if he could just get everything right, say the right words, make the right moves, life would finally click into place. But standing in the barn 2 weeks after the big dinner, watching Lila laugh with Walt over a crooked birdhouse, he realized something. Life wasn't about getting everything right. It was about showing up. Messy, imperfect, and real. The barn club was thriving. The heater worked, the pipes held, and the string lights had become a permanent fixture. Men came not just for advice, but for connection. And now Lila was part of it, effortlessly. But Calvin still had one hurdle left: trust. Not the easy kind, like trusting someone to hold your coffee while you tie your shoe. The hard kind, the kind that meant letting someone see the cracks. He'd been carrying those cracks for years. The doubts, the exhaustion, the quiet fear that maybe he wasn't enough. And tonight, he decided to stop carrying them alone. After the meeting, when the barn emptied and the night settled quiet around them, Calvin found Lila near the workbench, wiping sawdust from her hands. "Got a minute?" he asked, his voice low. She smiled. "Always." He led her outside, where the cold air smelled like pine and the stars scattered like diamonds across the dark. "I need to tell you something," he said, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. "Something I haven't said out loud to anyone." Lila turned to him, her expression calm, open. "Okay." Calvin took a breath. "For a long time I felt broken, like I was failing at something everyone else seemed to figure out. Relationships, life, all of it. Every time something didn't work, I thought, it's me. I'm the problem." His voice cracked, just a little. Starting this club, it wasn't just about fixing things. It was about proving I wasn't useless, that I could build something that mattered. Silence stretched, but it wasn't heavy. It was soft, like a blanket. Lila stepped closer, her eyes steady. Calvin, you're not broken. He swallowed hard. Sometimes it feels like I am. She reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek. You're human. That's not broken. That's life. Calvin closed his eyes, the weight he'd carried for years shifting, loosening. When he opened them, Lila was still there, warm, steady, real. And for the first time, he believed her. They stood under the stars, the barn glowing behind them, and Calvin realized something else. Love wasn't about perfection. It was about partnership. About finding someone who didn't just accept your cracks, but saw the beauty in them. And he'd found her. Chapter 13. Epilogue at the barn. Spring came slowly, painting the fields in green and gold. The barn smelled of fresh wood and coffee, and laughter spilled through its open doors like sunlight. The barn club had grown, 40 men now, maybe more. They came with toolboxes and questions, with stories and jokes, with a hunger for something the world had forgotten. Connection. And tonight, they weren't just fixing things. They were celebrating. Calvin stood near the entrance, watching as Walt carved slices of jerky like a man guarding treasure. Marcus debated interest rates with a guy who swore cash was king. And Derek, because some things never change, tried to convince everyone that chili was a legitimate wedding dish. Lila moved through the crowd like she'd always belonged, laughing with Sam about his clipboard obsession, helping a teenager sand a piece of wood for his first DIY project. Calvin felt his chest warm, the way it always did when he looked at her. She caught his eye across the room and smiled, a smile that said everything without saying a word. Calvin walked over, weaving through the chatter. You know, he said, grinning, when I started this, I didn't picture string lights and chilly debates. Lila laughed. Life's full of surprises. He nodded, his voice softening. You're my favorite one. Her eyes shimmered, and for a moment, the barn faded. The laughter, the tools, the chaos. It was just them. Calvin reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation. And in that simple gesture, in the warmth of her fingers, in the glow of the barn, in the hum of voices that had become a family, Calvin knew he wasn't broken. He wasn't failing. He was home.